I want to tell you a story about a guy who lived down the street from me. For a little while anyway. It was strange circumstances. I don't fully understand. I mean, I was a kid at the time. My parents don't really talk about it anymore. But from what we could understand from different neighbors telling our different versions of this story, this is kind of how it went down. So his name was Timothy, and I didn't really grow up in like a ritzy area or anything. You know, my parents like to think that we were middle class, but the truth is we weren't. And our neighbors certainly weren't. And so if you found something that was of value, that, you know, you would always bring it home to your parents. So what we heard, you know, is sort of living on the outskirts of, you know, an old town ghetto. Timothy was on his way home, walking through some fields, and he like reached down and he found this sort of like this clumpy piece of flesh or something. And then it could have been roadkill, it could have been anything. But the way the story goes is that it was a big toe. So Timothy was excited because, you know, he didn't come from much and they didn't have much. So to find any type of sustenance of any sort was a big deal. So he ran home really proud of himself, and he showed his mom this big toe. And his mom was really excited, really appreciative. The truth is the dad just, after he was laid off when the factories closed, he didn't really look for anything else, and it wasn't very dissimilar from anyone else's story in the time. So they were happy with what they had. So she ended up making a sort of, you know, like a root stew. So like onions and carrots, and then for flavor, she threw in the big toe. Anyway, they had a decent meal, as decent as you can have in those times. And that night, when Timothy went to bed, in the distance, he swore he heard this voice on the edge of the wind. It disrupted the dogs in the neighborhood. You could hear them barking as the voice sort of crawled across the wind. Where is my big toe? Timothy wasn't even sure what he heard. Closed his eyes tight, convincing himself it was just the wind. There was nothing to it. He heard it a little bit louder and a little bit closer. Where is my big toe? It's fair to say he was terrified at this point. It could have been the wind. It could have been anything, but he was certain that he heard something. He heard something. He buried his head underneath the covers because that's what you do. And it was dark. And aside from the dogs barking, it was just quiet. And then he heard right outside his home, "Who has my big toe?" And his heart began pounding. The terror was enveloping him. He was growing crazy. What if it was real? What if it was outside? He's certain his parents would have locked the door. There's no way. There's been thefts in the neighborhood as recently. They had to have locked the door. There's no way that it could have gotten in. And then he heard the door open. It was downstairs. It could have been any sound. What if it was the house resting? It didn't have to be the door, but there was the sound of breaking up the stairs. And then he heard it again. trying to help his family. He had no idea what he grabbed, and he certainly didn't think that it would come back looking for it. What is he supposed to do? He's just trying to do right by his family. He didn't know that it would come back. But then he heard the footsteps coming down the hall to his bedroom door. He was closing his eyes as tight as he possibly could, holding his breath. Maybe if I just stop my heart for a second, it will go away. And then he heard it louder, closer. Who was my big toe? Madness is swarming through his head. He doesn't know what to do. He jumps out of his bed and he rolls under it. What else are you supposed to do? That's normally where the monsters lurk, but he knows the monster is outside his door. And then the door creaks open, and he hears it walking closer to his bed. And it starts again. And he knows it, knows where he is, and he knows where it is. And it still calls, who has my big toe? And he dares peek out from under the bed. And he sees it reach out. You have it! Terrifying.